Welcome back to The Learning Curve, the podcast where we explore the educators, ideas, and experiences shaping how we learn and train in medicine. I am your host, Dr. Irtaza Asar. It's that time of the year again, not Christmas, but residency interview season. For thousands of medical students, this period carries enormous weight. Calendars start to fill up, suits start to come out of the closet, Zoom links flood your inboxes, and suddenly every conversation feels like it could reshape the rest of your career. Every answer, every pause, every smile. But behind the polished responses and the professional demeanor lies something that we don't talk about enough. Stress, uncertainty, imposter syndrome, and the pressure to perform rather than simply be yourself. Residency interviews aren't just about what's on your CV. They're about how you think, how you communicate under pressure, and also whether a program can picture you as part of their team on a tough shift. So how do you stand out without sounding rehearsed? How do you recover from curveballs, questions, awkward silences, or maybe a transcript that just isn't perfect? And what can educators and programs do to make this process more transparent, supportive, and human? Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by an expert, Dr. Chang. He is the Director of Clinical Education, and he is a core faculty member at Valley Health System Emergency Medicine Residency in Las Vegas, Nevada. He is an outstanding emergency medicine educator and a program leader. He's coached countless applicants through interview season, and today he's going to share his expertise and help us unpack the hidden hurdles that candidates face, along with practical strategies to approach interviews with clarity, confidence, and authenticity. Whether you're a student preparing for interviews, a resident reflecting on your experience, or an educator involved in recruitment, this conversation is going to be about moving beyond performance and towards alignment. Because at the end of the day, it's about finding programs and people where growth, belonging, and authenticity can thrive. Kenny, thank you so much for joining me today, man. I'm really excited to have you on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Irtaza. Been very thrilled to join you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Very excited to talk to you guys as well.
Yeah, this is going to be so much fun, man. And I was introspective about this topic, and I was thinking, I don't think I ever got formalized education on how to be successful during residency interview season. It was never really built into our medical education, especially when I was a medical student. I don't know if your experience was the same. It was kind of like, well, I mean, you've gotten this far. You clearly know how to interview, so we're just going to presume that you'll be able to do residency interviews really well. But I don't think that was really the case for me, because my first interview, I had no idea what to expect. So I'm really happy to have your expertise and just kind of have you share your thoughts. So before we dive into this, let's talk about just how interviewing has changed over the last several years. From your standpoint, why does it feel harder for applicants right now during interview season compared to applicants 10 years ago?
That's a great question. I'd say like 10 years ago, right? Everyone really came in. It was all in-person interviews. I think one big thing on Zoom is like tend to have good conversations. I love talking to all of our applicants. One thing is that it tends to get cut off at like 15 minutes. It's very regimented. That's one thing that I think it was really hard to go back to kind of how it was before. I think with the pandemic, of course, everything became virtual, especially like the 2020, 2021, even 2022. And then pretty much the guidelines have expanded now where people could do hybrids. But I still think that even though like hybrids are allowed now, technically, like a lot of programs still haven't gotten back to it. Yeah. Sometimes there's a lot of logistical issues as well. Like logistically, it's just a lot easier, a lot more like organized to just do things virtually. A lot more applicants can have more opportunities to interview compared to the traveling that you and Matt used to do when we were applicants. We have like 5 planes everywhere, drive out to like places hours away. But now with the virtual one, it has made things a little bit simpler in some sense, where like applicants can interview a lot more. Same thing with programs, you can do a lot more interviews. But at the same time, it takes away a lot of the intangibles. It takes away like being able to see a lot of programs. Of course, we still do like second looks, for example, like where applicants can come in and look at the place. But a lot of the intangibles, a lot of the getting to know people in person, that's kind of all taken away. So I think that's one thing that's changed. For better, for worse, that's just the reality that we live in. I still think that even with the pandemic being over, of course, it's still like flu season right now, respiratory illnesses. But at the end of the day, I still think that a lot of programs won't go back to it just because of the logistical issues.
Yep. And I thought about it too from a med student standpoint. I was like, man, like, Zoom interviews, it's great because I don't have to pay for flights. I don't got to pay for hotels. I don't have to do my dry cleaning, all this stuff, because I can just pop in on a camera and it'll be fine. And financially, it makes a lot more sense. And then from the program side of things, it makes sense too. Like, hey, I could probably interview a lot more applicants over a shorter period of time. Because again, that accessibility, it's something that you can't really get with having folks come to your site and some of the logistical challenges that you spoke about. One of the things that I think is all kind of interesting with Zoom is the time frame that you mentioned, right? The 15-minute cutoff. And that's something that I feel like a lot of people don't really prepare you for. That timer is like ticking down and you're like thinking to yourself, oh my God, like time is ticking down really quickly. I have to be able to articulate everything that I need to in that short period of time. And yet I don't think we actually give a lot of formalized education on how to do virtual interviews. And that's something that I think is a whole nother can of worms that applicants tend to struggle with. So I think that's actually a really great point. Kenny, let's segue over to given
Yeah.
these changes, what are the challenges that you see applicants struggling with the most? And these challenges often rarely get talked about openly. So, from your standpoint, what do you think are some of these challenges that applicants struggle with the most?
I think one of the challenges, of course, we talked about was like connecting kind of through Zoom. It really is that fine balance that we have to think about. Like, are you too rehearsed in some point?
Yep.
And I would say one big red flag, of course, we definitely can notice it as program faculty and interviewer. You can definitely tell if somebody has like notes out and everything on their computer screen, they're reading off of it. That's a big red flag. But those are things you can't do in person, right? You can't be somebody who like reads off an outline or your rehearsed answers. But I'd say that's one big flag I would advise to all of our applicants listening. That's one thing I would definitely not do. Try to be very authentic. I do think sometimes with like a Zoom interviews, and in-person interviews, it's pretty easy to like be very rehearsed. And I think it's always that fine balance. Yes, I think you should be somebody who does some research about the place you're interviewing at. I think that's the reality. All of us should do that. Like look at the program website, of course, read the materials that the program sends you. But at the same time, when it becomes this like checklist where you're kind of reading off everything that's over there and there's like no like kind of on the spot thinking, I think it comes off a little bit more rehearsed, robotic, and that's something to be really careful about. I would advise all of our applicants. I think there's like this balance between this genuineness, kind of on the spot, on the fly thinking, versus like being well researched, and it's that fine balance between those two that I think have to be addressed. I think another issue is I thought it was a really good point you mentioned earlier, Irtaza. You talked about preparation for interview. As a medical student, personally, I didn't get a lot of formalized interview training either. I was very grateful. We had a really good career development center. Our advisor actually wasn't a physician or anything. He actually was like an MA in education. Yeah, so we did a lot of like virtual Zoom practices, even though it was in person back then. So I think that thing is very helpful. So sometimes people that help you prepare aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily have to be people that are physicians or people in medicine, people that just interview well, people that work in marketing, HR, people that work in any job, family members, they can definitely help you with interviews as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really great point, man. Because I think that's something that I struggled with as a medical student is how do you like have an idea of like what you want to say to the program and have your story there in front of you, but then also not be like stumbling over your words every like 2 3 sentences, but then at the same time you don't want to sound too rehearsed and then you want to sound authentic. Is how do you get that balance between the two? And I think that's something that really does take a lot of practice, and the practice itself might be just the interview that you're at, and by the time you get to your fourth or fifth interview, there's definitely a lot more comfort at, hey, you know what, I've been asked this same question so many different times. I can make this more authentic. I can be more engaged with this question because I've already said my answer 4 or 5 times. So by the time I get to my fifth interview, it might be a lot easier. And then vice versa, the problem might be is by the time you get to your ninth interview and you're saying the same answer over, you might be a little bit more fatigued from that standpoint. But I think having that story and trying to make it as authentic as possible, I think that's actually a really fantastic point. And then I think sometimes I've also seen interviewees struggle with imposter syndrome where they think to themselves, I'm not good enough to be here. I don't belong here. Why is this program even interviewing? And then sometimes you can even feel that through that virtual format where a student just has that imposter syndrome there and you want to try to help them. But that's something that I think if we can create a little bit more awareness of, I think that can really help folks interview. So I think that's actually a fantastic point. So Kenny, when you see these hurdles, imposter syndrome, over rehearsing, virtual fatigue, not sounding authentic, from your standpoint, what does effective preparation actually look like, and how should applicants be preparing without trying to lose that authenticity?
I think a lot of it is preparing for concepts. So a lot of times when people write, I know best man speeches, people write speeches for anything, they kind of type out every single word. And I'd say like everyone's a little bit different, of course. I think sometimes writing out big outline concepts, like tell me about yourself. You kind of have an outline. I think outlines are a lot more important. They're a lot better than writing a full script. That's a lot more authentic. So you have these like big picture concepts. I think most of us as learners, we tend to remember big concepts, things that are more organized in a list. So I think if you have a concept like, oh, I had this little hurdle in my application. So, say like my step one, level one didn't go very well. I had a little bit of sub-I issues on one of them. I have like a outline that I know like certain points I'm going to talk about, like not finding excuses,
Yep.
maturity, those kind of outlines, but I wouldn't write it down word for word. When you rehearse, of course, you'll notice that like, things a little different, right? Same thing when we present the program, we have like an outline in our head. Sometimes I help out our PD. We do like the program director, program introduction. I have an outline in my head of like things I'm going to say, but it's not going to be word for word. So if you look at me do the whole grand presentation, it'll be different every time because I think it's just a lot more authentic that way. Same thing when our PD does it. His program presentation, it's a little bit different every time because it's an outline. It's not really like a rehearsed answer where everything's like written out word for word. So I think that's one thing that's huge preparation. And in addition, nobody really kind of talks about this as much, but when you're on Zoom, it's very easy to wake up and like jump into Zoom. Everyone thinks about that, but I think the preparation is so important. Still like look the part, right? Still make sure you dress up. Still make sure your room's clean. Make sure you have a good background, good lighting, good internet. It's very common sense things like that, but those things are little fine details I think that do make a difference. If you're somebody who you notice that your camera quality is always a little bit off, definitely like try to address that beforehand. That's one thing that in person, right? Everyone's like dressed the part, everyone prepares in that sense, but on Zoom, a lot of times it's pretty easy to just kind of do interviews. Okay, I'll do it on my phone. I use this headphone. But at the end of the day, I think it's still this like package that you have to present forward.
I love the idea of the outline, where again, you don't want to sound too scripted, but at the same time, you have some general key points that you want to get across to make yourself seem memorable. I remember this one candidate that I was interviewing, and till this day, I still remember him. And the interview was going really well. He was kind of doing all the things that we just talked about, that all the great things that you alluded to, where, he had his story, he had all these moments prepared where I was like, wow, you know what? This guy would definitely be a really good fit for our program. I could imagine working with him at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. And then we got to his hobbies, and I asked him, I was like, hey, like, what kind of hobbies do you have? And he's like, well, one of the hobbies that I have is I enjoy doing magic tricks. So now I'm looking at the Zoom clock and I'm like, okay, he's got like 3 minutes left. So I'm like, hey, out of curiosity, what kind of magic tricks do you do? And immediately his first sentence to me is, I'm really happy you asked me about that because I actually had a magic trick prepared in this event that you would ask me this question. So now I'm like, oh my God, like this guy, he clearly, this is not scripted, but he clearly had this outline in his mind that, hey, I'm going to do this if I get asked this. So I'm like, okay, man, what's your magic trick? And now I'm looking at the Zoom clock. We got 2 minutes and 30 seconds. It's clocking down. And man, like this guy, he better get this magic trick in now. And he's like, yeah, so I have a deck of cards. So right on his desk, he pulls up, shows me an entire deck of cards. I want you to pick a card. And, oh man, I didn't expect this to happen. So now I'm caught off guard. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to pick the Jack of Hearts. And so he starts shuffling the deck. Time is clocking down. I'm like, man, this guy, man, he's got 45 seconds to really get this magic trick down. And 25 seconds down, he's shuffling the deck. And then he's like, hey, it starts telling me this random other story. And then all of a sudden pulls out the Jack of Hearts as there's 10 seconds left. He's like, is this your card? Yeah, that's my card. Dude, that's amazing that you're able to do this in this pressure situation and clock is ticking down. And then basically he gets kicked out of the Zoom room. And now I'm like thinking to myself, man, that is probably going to be the single most memorable guy that I'm going to interview during this entire interview cycle. And that actually speaks volumes to the exact point that you echoed, right? He didn't have this scripted, but he had this planned in the event that he would get asked this. And that really came off as such a unique, genuine, organic moment that I was like, you know what? This is definitely going to be something that I'm going to bring up because it's really stayed with me and it really resonated with me. So I think fantastic points there, Kenny. So let's segue over to the actual interview day, right? So your prep is done, your room is set up. Curveballs happen, right? So what do you do in that moment where, let's say, you get a really tough question on the day of the interview, or you get that impression that, oh my God, this interview is slipping? How do you recover from that? What are some tips and tricks that folks can employ in that situation?
Great question, Irtaza. I would say some of it I can even reflect back as an applicant getting asked those questions. Curveballs, I definitely think as a program, right, we have to get to know you as a character. If there's any red flags, I think it's a very fair question to ask. So I would say like number one is preparation. So if you know you have like certain red flags on your application, things that have to be addressed, like just be prepared and have an answer or have an outline, I would say, not just a script, but an outline of how you would address that. One thing I would say is if you do get asked questions that kind of off-putting, like they kind of hit you like a curveball, like you were mentioning. And the best thing is just, it's okay to completely stop for a little bit, not a little bit, get your thoughts together and then present forward. There's nothing wrong with that. I think if you get thrown off a little bit, it's okay. Like it's better to have a thoughtful response, I would always say, especially from like the interviewer side. I think having a thoughtful response is a lot better than just having something on the spot. And of course, it's that balance between like authenticity and like scripted, right? But it's okay to like take a step back and nod and then come up with a good answer. So for example, I remember I got asked by interview. This was all in person back then, of course. I got asked, hey, tell me a little bit. Why'd you go down on your level two? Your level two was not that great compared to your level one. And I was like, oh, That definitely took me back a little bit. Like, I think any applicant, if you get that kind of question, I wouldn't say it was like my major red flag. It was something that I thought about, but it wasn't something I was expecting. But of course, I took a step back and go, I'm like, that you're absolutely right. I'm like, that is true. My level two score did go down. I appreciate that question. So you're right. I think as I self reflect, perhaps I spent a lot of time doing clinical training. I worked very hard clinically. I probably didn't go back and study as hard as I should have after for every shelf exam as an MS3. And I own up to that. Not excuses. I can see why that's a concern, especially with level two correlating with board pass rates. But I'm ready to do that. I take full responsibility for that. I have a very solid plan going forward. I know that I have to really balance this studying and clinical work. So a lot of times that's kind of how I answer this question, but that kind of always resonates with me when I have difficult interview questions is sometimes it's things that you aren't expecting. I think the most important thing is when we want applicants to interview well, I think a lot of it's just like being humble, like owning up to things. I think for me personally, that's something I still do as faculty every day, like owning up to who you are as a person, not being somebody who's deflecting, somebody who like gets very defensive. I think that's something that's very important when you get these questions is that sometimes the stress response tends to kick in a little bit. So if you get like a curveball question, people tend to get defensive. And I think that's when things kind of go awry a little bit. So sometimes to prevent that, I think is just slowing down a little bit and then coming up with a more calm response. That's when I would approach it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point, man. And that's something that I think I struggled with when I was interviewing. Really, that pause, I think, is so valuable where you'll get asked a lot of the same questions. Hey, why emergency medicine? Why internal medicine? Why podiatry? Tell me about your biggest weakness. You'll get a lot of those so you can be prepared for that. But then when you get that question that comes totally out of left field and it catches you off guard, I actually find it more, I guess, almost attracting from an interviewee standpoint where I'm like, wow, this person is really taking their time to think about this answer when they actually take that pause and just say, hey, yeah, I didn't expect that question, but let me think about that. And I also love the way you answered that question about the step stores, because again, we're not all perfect. We're all going to have some blips on our applications. And naturally, if you have an answer or at least an outline, and or you're also showing that you're taking accountability for that, I think that actually speaks volumes to an applicant, because that shows to me as somebody that's interviewing you, this individual's taking accountability for something that happened. They also are showing me exactly why this happened and also telling me, hey, these are the things that I implemented to try to fix this problem, right? And that shows growth, and that shows somebody that I can teach and work with. Because again, if I give them constructive criticism during a shift about something that, let's say, went wrong with patient care, it shows me that, hey, this individual is willing to take that feedback, adopt that, as opposed to just shutting down on me and not really engaging with what I'm telling them. So I think that's actually a fantastic point. Kenny, let me pick your brain about this. Interviewees, they walk into a room and they're like, okay, I have to showcase myself, right? But when they're interviewing at these places, the place is also interviewing for them, if that makes sense, right? So what kind of mindset should interviewees walk into a room with?
That's a great one. Great question. I love how you mentioned that. I really think, especially with how EM match has gone, like from 2020, 2022, 2023, you can see like EM definitely has a lot more spots, a lot more opportunities. One thing I'm really proud about EM is that we're a lot more open-minded. And with that said, I do think the ball's in the applicant's court a lot more compared to when you and I were interviewing. For better or for worse, that's just the reality I see. So yes, you made a really good point, Irtaza, with us also being interviewed by applicants. I think number one is like applicants are like prepared. They like know about our program. One thing we always ask, for example, being in Las Vegas, we always want people to have like a little bit more deeper understanding about like what Nevada is. I think it's important to understand, we're a healthcare desert, not just the like movie Hangover, right? Or bachelor parties, bachelorette parties. But I think a lot of it is, as an applicant, number one, you should like prepare, especially if you're going to a different part of the country where you haven't been exposed to, like definitely do some research about that. At least like do a little bit of research about the town, so you're not going in blind. I can't say I was perfect as a medical student. There were places where I did not interview as well. I like didn't do my research, and I wish I did. So I think number one is like, as an applicant, you're prepared. You did your research on this place. Once you do that research, you like read up on the program materials the program sends you. You know about the city a little bit. It'll really come off that when you're asking the faculty that are interviewing you questions, it comes off a lot more authentic. If you've done your research on it, then your questions are a lot more thoughtful. They're not just questions where you're just like writing a list of questions. They're very customized to the program, if that makes sense. I would say that'd be the kind of the mindset. So I think as an applicant, of course, like, you got to know two things. Number one, you know your application pretty well. So you know your application in and out. Everything that you put on your paper has to be something that you can talk about. Like, even if you did some sort of research project that you were like a secondary author for. Like, make sure you know about that. Make sure you can explain it. Every faculty has like certain things that catch their eye. So a lot of times you will get asked like sometimes more customized questions where they're like, oh, that was really cool. You did what about this paper? Tell me a little bit more about that. And you don't want to be somebody who's off put by that if you don't know your application very well. Like, oh wait, I mean, they put my name on the paper. Like, then that becomes a problem over there, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, so I think number one, like know your application in and out. So you, like any questions that come, whether it's like kind of more like curveball questions. And honestly, a lot of times for us from faculty standpoint, it's like a genuine question.
Yep.
We're just kind of curious, like, oh, that looks really cool. Tell me a little bit about that. So know your application very well. And then afterwards, when you interview it, you also are interviewing us. I genuinely think that the ball is also in the applicants' court also as well. Much
Yep.
more so than back then.
Yep.
So number one is when you have thoughtful questions, I always think they're questions that you can't really get on paper or even clarifying. Sometimes the application material that we sent out is always very helpful. It really shows that, you've done your research, you read up on things that we gave you, but then now you want to know a little bit further. I think those are always pretty good questions to ask the program. For me personally, I'm a millennial, right? So I'm a little bit younger, but if like applicants ask things about my background, I'm always happy to answer that also as well. So a lot of it, like when you're entering the program and you're getting another program, I think a lot of thoughtfulness really shows a difference. We can really feel that that's a genuine interest, and then that really comes across as well.
Honestly, I think that's a fascinating point, and I think sometimes a lot of folks like forget to really take into account. I tell this to a lot of my residents that are like hunting for jobs. I tell them, hey, this is probably the first time in your career that odds are anybody's ever told you this, but now you are looking for a fit for you. And that's something that I think a lot of medical students sometimes forget too, is that you're also interviewing the program as well. So if you did not get a lot of information and or you did not get the right information and or you just got bad vibes, this might not be the right place for you, right? And that's something that, again, I think a lot of the times we don't really tell folks about, because I guess focus is more so on, hey, you have to impress during the interview. But the program also has to put in some effort to try to impress you as well, because this is going to be the place you're going to be training at for the next 3-4 years of your career. And you want to find a place that really resonates with you. One of my most memorable interviews, I walked in to meet the program director, some of the core faculty. They were all in a room, and I introduced myself. And the first thing they did is they handed me an EKG. This was a 15-minute interview, and literally for 9 out of the 15 minutes, it was just questions about what do I see on the EKG. It was a STEMI. I'm like, okay, how do you manage this? Okay, do you want to do nitro? Do you not want to do nitro? And after it was done, they were like, oh, okay, that's great. Hey, do you have any questions for me? And so I asked as many questions as I could in that 6-minute time period. But afterwards, I was doing some reflection and I was thinking, you know what? I didn't really get the vibe of the program, because they were just testing my academic knowledge for 9 out of the 15 minutes. And yet I don't really know anything about the program. I don't know anything about the residents. I didn't really feel a connection to the program. And that just made me think, this is not a place that I could see myself at the next 3 or 4 years, because I didn't really get good vibes from this place just because of this kind of moment. And I'm sure you probably had those same experiences where you're like,
I
well,
have that.
I didn't really get that same emotion that I expected to get when I went to this place.
That's funny. Yeah, I had one where kind of very similar, not an EKG. I'm a lot better at EKGs now, thankfully. But I had an oral boards case from one of my interviewers. Thankfully, what I did appreciate was that wasn't just the only interview. It was one of the interviewers. So that was one of the interviewers. And then I had the actual like PD discussion and everything. But I had one where it was like an oral boards case. And it's all debatable. I think, of course, every program has like a different culture. And that's the beauty of EM is that it's our program, right? But everyone has an opportunity to how they want to interview applicants. And if that's something that they value, that's totally okay also as well. For us personally, I always think that these medical questions, like very specific technical questions like EKGs, oral boards, all those things, I always think that those are things I always tell applicants, like these are things that we're going to get 3
Yep.
years to like get to know you, and even beyond too. I practice with some of our graduates as well, oral boards cases. But these are all things that we can do like down the line. I think today is like more about you as a person. Like these are
Yep.
all things we can do later on. And program leadership, we always have to think about as well, right? How are we coming off the applicants? How are we like projecting ourselves? I think that's also something that, same thing. I was in your shoes as well. I self-reflected. I was like, I don't know if I want to really be here.
Yeah.
Per se,
And, and I think about it like this too, right? Like, so this is actually a great segue, because this was actually the next thing I was going to ask you about. So for the educators listening, for the program directors listening, where do you think we can do a better job in making these interviews more fair, more transparent, and just more human?
I think there's multiple things about interviewing. I think number one is when we do interviews, you really have to show that you're not just trying to get through the day. That's something that's very important. I've gone on interviews where I think it was 24 people in one morning, and you can really feel that it became this
Yeah.
like rotating room. Like I think how you come off as a program when you have a sincere interest in your applicants, I think it really comes off. You're taking the time, even though of course reality is like it's not going to be the longest interview, but we really are showing interest in you. We really are getting to know you as a person. We're laid back, but we're getting to know your character. I think that really shows a difference. It
Yeah.
really shows that we get to know our applicants. That's what it shows. And I think sometimes because of logistical reasons, I do think one of the pitfalls is programs try to run through things very quickly. So sometimes it's a lot simpler. I've gone on some interviews where there were not that many interview days. There were only like 3 in the interview season. But then it became this like 24 in-person like interview where like everyone kind of cranks through. And I remember like flying all the way out. Can't specifically name programs, but I like flew out like hours away. It was in the snow. I grew up in California, SoCal, so like wasn't used to snow. I like got all the way there. I even bought like snow boots and everything. I went there, and the interview literally finished in like a minute or two. I was like, oh, I'm like, oh. So I felt that was a little bit it was definitely off-putting as an applicant. Like you felt like you traveled all this way, and of course, I got a very warm like, "Hey, thank you so much for coming out here." But I'm like, "Oh, I like barely got to know you guys." So I think that's one thing is that as a program, you really have to genuinely show that you're interested in all your applicants as people. And one of the ways to do that is to not like cram things and not to like over rush things and move applicants on as like a rotating room. That's something to be very cognizant of. I also think having multiple interviewers is very helpful as well. That's something I think that gives a lot of perspective to a program. It's a lot more fair for the applicant as well. I think everyone subconsciously, no matter what, has like a certain things that they ask about. So, like for example, in our interviews that we do as our program, we have our PD who does interviews every applicant, our APD interviews every applicant, and I interview every applicant also as well. And then we have different faculty. And then when we had residents, we had different residents kind of interview as well. And I think that's very important. It gives applicants multiple views of different people. You'll see that everyone kind of prioritizes a little bit of different things. Everyone has like different interests that they will ask applicants. And sometimes like you'll realize that when you have different interviewers, people just connect a little bit differently. We're all human, right? I think
Yeah.
that's something that I can't stress enough is that we're all human. And so having multiple different interviewers makes a difference, I think, for applicants. You have to see like a different perspective of the program, different kind of personalities that you might connect with a little bit better versus not. So I think that's something that's very important as well. And as a program, when you go back and you do your rank list meetings, you do your evaluations of applicants, it's a lot more fair also as well. We always do a debrief after we interview our applicants. And sometimes you'll realize that like it's very consistent. We all see like a very consistent pattern. Like, hey, this person's a great fit or this person's not so good of a fit. But at least I think it's a lot more fair for applicants as well. Like where you've seen like multiple different interviews, and everyone has like a different opinion, everyone has a different perspective, and I think that's something that's so important from a
Yeah.
program standpoint, where when you're ranking applicants, and then also for the applicant as well, you got to know like different aspects, different personalities of the program, because we're all unique in our own ways.
Yep, absolutely. And I honestly, I can already relate to, how you have those 24 applicant days where you get to that point where the faculty member has already probably interviewed 14 people and you're the 15th person on the list. And you can tell they're tired. You could tell they're not engaged. And then that just leaves you with bad vibes, leaving the room, the Zoom room or whatever, just thinking to yourself, you know what, this person really wasn't that engaged with me. So now what could I have done better? You kind of reflect on that and you think to yourself, maybe this interview should have been scheduled in a way where we got more one-on-one time with the faculty. And I think that's also a great point that you brought up about having residents involved as well, so they can offer a different perspective. Sometimes candidates might feel more comfortable asking questions to residents as opposed to attendings, right? And that can also be helpful as an applicant where you see, hey, are the residents truly happy here at this program? If you're interviewing with a resident, chief resident, the guy or the girl seems like extremely exhausted, tired, unhappy, then that might be kind of a red flag for you, right? At the same time, versus where you have somebody that's really engaged with you and seems very happy with their life. You're like, you know what? I could see myself working here for 2-3 years. I could see my family, being, friends with other people's family members here because we just gel well and it just makes sense. So I think that actually works out really well. I think the other thing that also helps from a faculty side of things is try to get your faculty members not just to see kind of the polish, but to see also potential and to see teachability and kind of advocating for that. Because again, a lot of people have ups and downs in life and they also have ups and downs in their actual application cycle. But then during that interview process, if you get the impression that, hey, you know, this individual I could really teach, I could really see them being kind of a diamond in the rough where after 3 years they'll be ready to go. And I think that actually works out really well. And that gives chances to a lot of applicants that potentially might not get that same chance. And again, that's also where that bias training also helps as well, where if you can kind of acknowledge that, hey, I might have a certain bias towards this kind of applicant, how can I work to reduce that? Because I want to give everybody as fair of a chance as possible. So I think that's actually a really fantastic overview. So Kenny, as time is running low, is there anything that you wanted to articulate or say that I potentially might not have asked you about?
Oh yeah, just to kind of touch on a little bit about the interview kind of culture from programs. I really like how you mentioned that. I think program fatigue is like, it's definitely real. You'll see that, as faculty, as we interview kind of down the season, everyone truly gets fatigued. And I think a lot of it is to be cognizant about that. What I'm really proud of and very happy is that our program director immediately recognizes that. So when we interview applicants, we actually interview three at a time, like a short 5-minute break, and let everyone kind of get a drink of water, bathroom, pet your animals real quick, and then come right back in. Right. And then we always have a 15-minute break between the two different morning and afternoon sessions. So we only do 12 per day, but then we do like blocks of 3. And I also think that as a program, from our standpoint, it's all a lot more memorable when we do things in chunks of 3s. Same thing when you talk about studying also as well, right? Studying is always a lot more effective when you gotta study in like short bursts. You always remember the last thing you kind of studied, and then same thing with applicants. You remember the last thing you talked about the applicants. So I think it's a lot more fair for the applicants. It's a lot more memorable, and at the same time, as like a program, you get to like construct, and you're a lot more like engaged when you go back and you do like the next chunk of 3 applicants. Makes a huge difference, I would say. Scoring system, we definitely experiment that with our program. We've experimented with where we used to have like a lot more complicated scoring system. Now we just kind of do 1 through 20. And I think the notes are a lot more important.
Yeah.
When you do rank list meetings, the notes are much more important for a program than just the scoring system.
Mhm.
We used to have a very complex one where like certain scores or like certain answers, you kind of subtract 2 points, add 2 points over there. Some places like to do that. And if that's your program, completely fine. Like everyone has like the
Yeah.
own choice. And if that works very well for you guys, that's cool. But one thing we determined was that became way too complex, and it became this. Now, like as we're writing notes, it becomes just like subtract there and then technicalities and everything. Whereas,
Mhm.
and it really takes away from that genuine conversation. So I think scoring systems, be very careful about how you use that as a program. I think when we simplified it, we got a lot more genuine conversations. Now we're
Yeah.
focused on just talking to you. And then the notes are a lot more important. The ones that you write on RCAS or Thalamus, when you write down those notes, those are way more important when you do the rank list meeting as opposed to, some kind of complex scoring system. Just an opinion, but one thing I've noticed also as well.
Yeah, I love that. Honestly, I think quantitative evaluations, I think definitely they have a place, especially when you're interviewing so many applicants. But I think that qualitative observation tends to be so valuable, where you can get feedback from different faculty, feedback from residents, and then just when it comes time for the match meeting, you can remember that applicant, right? So like that story with the guy with the card with the magic trick, and I'm like, man, I'm not going to forget that, right? But there's no way for me to put that on somebody's evaluation if my entire evaluation is all just quantitative based. So I think that's actually a really, really great point. Now, Kenny, as we're running low on time, one of the questions that I ask every single guest that I have on is, if you are a first time listener, what would be the 3 key big takeaways that I can take away from this episode?
Number one is like we talked about the whole preparation, building confidence, but authenticity builds connection. And I think really for applicants and for programs is really finding that fine balance. So as we talked about, using outlines of concepts, having those things in mind rather than a script. I mean, that's what makes for a good interview both ways from the applicant and from our program. Those things make a huge difference. I think one thing is also remembering that interview should be a conversational. It's not a test. And I think that builds for a lot more meaningful connection. And I think just through conversation, sometimes we get to know each other. We get to like see part of your character. You get to see part of our character also as well. So I think interview, we have to think about it more as a conversation as opposed to like a test than anything. And my final point I would say is really, it's not about perfection. I think every person has a program, and sometimes it's all about fit. I think fit is something that's so intangible. There's not really a scientific formula for it, but fit is one of those things that I think every program should look for. And sometimes it doesn't have to be something that's personal. We're like, oh, this person just isn't trying to fit. It's completely okay. Maybe they fit very well with another program. And that's completely okay. I think being in tune with that as program faculty, as applicants, it's a place where like we try to look for your potential. So fit, I think, is a very important factor. a Chinese term my parents have always told me it's called 有缘没缘. It basically means like fateful connection. And sometimes that's what it is. So I think
That's awesome.
as much as we try to make EM like a science where like we have slowies, we have like validated things that court publishes on, we have like academic journals that publish on like slowies, program fit. A lot of it is that we have to recognize that we're all human and we all have biases. That's why I think it's so important to have like multiple different interviewers. You have these biases that you can always check yourself in. Do I have an affinity for this applicant because they went to the same medical school, same interests? Am I giving them a little bit more leeway? So I think that's something very important is that like it's all about fit and not striving for objectivity, but knowing that we're all humans, we're all subjective in some way, but giving everyone like a fair chance also as well. Those would
I
be,
love
I
that.
think, those would be like some of my key takeaways over here.
I love those three key takeaways, man. That the last one I think is definitely really valuable, and I think that's something that we as educators can do a better job of trying to teach our medical students and residents about, especially when they're interviewing, is that fit. Because again, the numbers are always there, quantitative evaluations are always there, but sometimes if a place doesn't meet the vibe check, it doesn't meet the vibe check. And sometimes if you get great vibes and you think to yourself, hey, I can be here for the next 3 years and I can enjoy working with these people and I can call them my second family, there's nothing better than that. So I love that, man. That's actually awesome. Kenny, is there any place on social media where folks can reach out to you if they wanted any advice about interviews, matching, or anything else along those lines?
Yeah, definitely. So if any applicants wants to follow us, we're very open. We love our applicants. We always welcome everyone back for like second looks if they want to. It's of course not something we can officially like recommend, but it's always something that we're always very open minded. Our Instagram is a VHS, so VHS underscore and EM residence. And that's our Instagram. I always check that periodically as well. I've gotten applicants that have come to meet me after like messaging us on that. So we're millennials. We follow Instagram well. We're always very open minded. Yeah.
I love that. And what I'll do is I'll actually link that in the show notes and I'll tag on Instagram. So for anybody that's interested in connecting with Kenny or has any questions regarding interviews and just this entire process, I think he is a fantastic resource. So Kenny, hey, thank you so much for your time, man. This has been an incredibly thoughtful and grounding conversation. And thank you for sharing your perspective and your experience.
And thank you, Irtaza.
Yeah, absolutely, man. If there's one thing that I hope listeners take away from this episode, it's this. Residency interviews, like Kenny said, aren't about performing a perfect version of yourself. They're about clarity, connection, and fit. Preparation really matters, but authenticity matters more. Your goal isn't to impress every program in the room. It's to find a place where you can learn, grow, and connect. For the students listening, remember, if an interview doesn't feel like a fit, that information matters. And if one did, trust that feeling. For the educators and program leaders that are listening, the way we show up in these conversations matter more than we realize. Every interview is an opportunity to model the culture that we claim to value. Thanks again to Dr. Kenny Chang for joining me today, and thank you to all for listening. If you found this episode helpful, consider sharing it with a student or a colleague heading into the interview season. And as always, keep learning, keep reflecting, and I'll see you next time on The Learning Curve.